Hello. I don't know if you're like me, but I love stories with happy endings. In my house, it's not unheard of that when choosing a film to watch of an evening, I ask, are you sure it has a happy ending? And if it doesn't, I'm not sure I want to watch it. My children often say, oh, that was a great film, but it's not your kind of film, Mum. You wouldn't like it. I also don't mind knowing how a story ends before we get to the end. I never used to be like that, but as I've grown older, I'm quite comfortable with knowing how it's all going to end. And that just means that I can relax more, let the story unfold. Now, I know it's not the same for everyone. Some people get really upset if they find out how it ends. It seems to spoil the story for them. So if you're one of those people, this is a spoiler alert. Put your fingers in your ears, close your eyes, whatever it is that you do, because I'm going to tell the ending of the story. It is a happy ending. It's my kind of story. So we're going to pick up this story in John chapter 4. Jesus is traveling through Galilee and he's preaching. And it says in John 4, verses 46 to 47. Now, all the scriptures today are out of the New Living Translation, apart from one, and I'll tell you about that one when we get to it. So, in John chapter 4, verse 46 to 47, as he, that's Jesus, travelled through Galilee, he came to Cana, where he had turned the water into wine. There was a government official in nearby Capernaum whose son was very sick. Now, some translations say it was a royal official. Verse 47, when he heard that Jesus had come from Galilee, from Judea to Galilee, he went and begged Jesus to come to Capernaum to heal his son who was about to die. So for us to read that the government official went to see Jesus, we don't understand that actually he travelled about 20 miles. And he probably walked. And when you think about it, if you walk roughly 3 miles an hour, that would have taken him 5-6 hours to walk to see Jesus. And you know, he's quite a high official, a very important person. But if you drop down to 47, he addresses Jesus as Lord, putting himself under Jesus, even though he has actual legal authority over Jesus. So he asks Jesus to come and heal his son. Now, Jesus' reply seems a bit strange. If you look at verse 48, he seems to be addressing other people and not speaking directly to the man. The you here is a plural you, and it might be helpful for us to say you all. Now, Pete and I are just back from Texas and they like that expression. They talk about y'all all the time, so I'll try not read it with a Texas accent, but let's look at verse 48. Jesus asked, will you never believe in me unless you or y'all see miraculous signs and wonders? In this case, Jesus seems to be expressing impatience with those who need to see miraculous signs before they believe in him and in what he teaches. But we're going to talk about this particular point again later. So for now, we'll just leave it and move on with the story. But what we notice is that the official doesn't engage Jesus's comment at all. He kind of ignores it. Instead, he focuses on what it is he needs, what he's desperate for. He says in verse 49, Lord, please come now before my little boy dies. You see, he's desperate. He wants Jesus to come with him to see his son, to save him. And you know, as parents, as many of us are, we can relate to this. This must have been a really horrible situation for this person to be in. But you know, he had tenacity, like his faith, and he is rewarded by Jesus. Jesus simply says, you know, your son lives. Now, this is in the New Living Translation. John 4:50 says that your son will live. But a better translation, and we'll read it in the New King James, it says, Jesus said to him, go your way, your son lives. And the man believed Jesus' word and started home. So it was in the present tense, not the future tense, as some translations have it. This man's son was instantly healed. not that your son will sometime in the future be healed. Right then, right there, he was healed. Now that's quite amazing. The child's not present. The father wanted Jesus to come, but Jesus didn't need to come. Even though the child was 20 miles away, Jesus said, he's healed, your son lives. Now this shows us that Jesus has got the power and command over life and death. And he said of his own life in John chapter 10 verse 18, I have the power to lay it down and the power to take it up again. When I was researching this sermon, I came across in The Working Preacher, a commentary by Jamie Clark Souls, and I love what she said, and it made me think about this whole story. When she was describing the power that Jesus demonstrated through his miracles, she says, this is no small God we believe in, and no small life we live as a result. I'll read it again, it's worth thinking about. This is no small God we believe in, and no small life we live as a result. In other words, there's no circumstances in which Jesus can't carry out his will, and distance is not something that holds him back. You know, there is no part of the world, in fact, no part of the whole universe that Jesus cannot reach and cannot do his will in. Let's carry on with the story and let's look at the next few verses. As he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, your son lives. Then in verse 52, then he inquired of them the hour when he got better. And they said to him, yesterday, at the 7th hour, his fever left him. So the father knew that it was the same hour in which Jesus said to him, your son lives. And he himself believed, and his whole household. Now there's a few points I wanted to pick up before we move on. One was that it probably took the man a long time to walk to meet with Jesus. And he either stayed overnight or he walked over the night to get back home, because notice the servant says yesterday, so this is the following day. So the man, as soon as Jesus said what he said, he doesn't hang around. He doesn't say, are you sure? Are you sure you don't want to come back with me just to make sure? Jesus says, your son lives, and the man believed him. He had such a strong faith. And it wasn't until later, when he met his servants, or in fact even later than that, when he saw his son, that he saw what Jesus said actually with his own eyes. So he had faith that Jesus could do what he said. And it was interesting that the son was healed right at the moment Jesus said the words. That's when the fever had left him. And it says the 7th hour. Now we know that numbers mean things in the Bible, and the number of 7 is the number of completion. So this rich meaning is sometimes lost when we read in other translations. Other translations might say at 1 in the afternoon, because the clock starts at 6 a.m. in the morning, and then later on at the 7th hour, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So while that's technically correct, sometimes when we read other translations, we miss all these little details that help us to marvel at how great God is, and how he's concerned about the details and he thinks about it. So again, I'm thinking of Jamie's quote where she says, this is no small God we believe in, and no small life we live as a result. Our God is a God of details. Now, the third point I want to make is about the word used in the scriptures, believed. It says, and he believed, and his whole household. Now, 3 times in this particular passage, John says the word believed. And now John says that the whole household believed as well. Back in those days, it was customary that the religion of the head of the house, it determined the religion and the beliefs of the whole household. So if we're looking for examples, we could look at Cornelius in Acts chapter 11 and Lydia in Acts 16. They're examples of them influencing the beliefs of the whole household. But in here, John seems to be going a step further, and he's indicating that the experience of the healing caused direct belief in not only the Father, but in the others who witnessed it for themselves. And if you remember last week, Pete was talking about the Samaritans, and when the woman came back from the well and she talked to her villagers, they believed, but then they also asked Jesus to stay for a couple of days, and through his speaking to them, they believed even more. So there was a deepening of their belief, and that's what we're getting here. There's a deepening belief and a greater understanding of who Jesus is, because for the official to go in the first place, there had to be some sort of belief. No one would travel 20 miles and ask somebody to heal their son if they didn't believe that Jesus could do it. Jesus speaks a word and life happens, just as God does in the opening of Genesis. And according to John, the Word was God, and nothing was brought to life without the Word. So the man sees his son health completely restored. In fact, if Jesus didn't intervene, this official was convinced that his son would die. And this was a powerful witness for everyone, and not just those who were immediately affected by it. You know, the Bible is written for followers of Jesus down through the ages, and it's written for us today. So what can we learn from it? We are the ones whose belief and understanding can deepen if we pay attention to the scriptures here. Spending time in the Bible, reading about these stories and meditating on them and making them come alive in our minds is a way to strengthen our faith. So let's just spend a few more minutes and see if we can put ourselves more into the story and think about how the people felt. How did the father feel when he watched his son, and it seems to be a young son, getting steadily more and more sick, fearing that he was going to die? How did he feel when he set off? Was he determined? Did he walk quickly? How did he feel once Jesus said, "Your son lives"? Did he run back home? How was he feeling? What was it like when he met the servants, and they told him the joyous news? Did they laugh? Did they hug each other? What was it like for him to actually go home and lift his son up and hug him and know that Jesus had healed him? And then did they sit around as a group and talk about that? Tell all the details of the story? The Bible often gives us the main details, but when we flesh it out and make it come alive, the stories are more powerful. And when we as people can relate to some of these stories through our own life experiences, we can clearly see how the Bible becomes the living word of God. It's real, it's relevant for us today. And when we share personal examples of God intervening in our lives with other Christians, it builds all of us up and strengthens everyone's faith. That's one of the lovely things about us getting together and sharing our trials with one another. We can share our triumphs too, and it not only builds the individual up, it builds everyone up. And when we think about evangelism, sharing our stories when it's appropriate with people who are not believers, witnessing to them, it's a powerful thing, powerful testimony to people. And you're not arguing about whether the Bible is fact or fiction. You're just sharing your story, and it comes across really well to people, and it convicts their hearts. But before I finish my look in John chapter 4, I would like to take a few moments to go back to Jesus's comments about needing to see signs before we believe. So as I said, these words were written not just for people back in those days, but for us today. So let's look again at John chapter 48. Verse 48, chapter 4. John 4, verse 48. Jesus asked, "Will you never believe in me unless you all see miraculous signs and wonders?" So we've heard how this story was about Jesus miraculously healing a young child. But there are dangers in this story. Because if we look at the sign and see it as a sign, as an end in itself, rather than a pointer to God, then that's not good. The whole point of the story wasn't to heal the child, although that was wonderful. The point was to show everyone and us, even today, who Jesus was. In the ministry of Jesus, it's evident that the working of miraculous signs and wonders sometimes was a stumbling block rather than a stepping stone to faith. Next, we take the story that John told in chapter 5, and this is an example of this. It's about how Jesus healed the lame man by the pool of Bethsaida. Now, there was no conversion or no strengthening of this man's faith. In fact, when you read further on in the story, you hear how he betrays Jesus by telling the officials who healed him on the Sabbath. So it wasn't about changing his faith or growing his faith. The miracle had a different purpose. And the miracle in healing the official's son, yes, it did strengthen their faith, but it also pointed to Jesus and pointed other people to Jesus to let them and us know that Jesus has the power over life and death. So we have to be careful in all we do that we don't take the wrong meaning and take things out of context. And it is wonderful when we see God answering our prayers, especially when it involves healing. And some of you might know that recently Pete and I came back from the States and we had gone over to visit our grandchildren. We have 2 new grandsons. One is 1.5 years old and one was just a few weeks old. So when I was reading this story, I could really relate to it because our grandson, when we arrived, he got very, very sick. And we were very worried about him. We feared for him and we prayed fervently that he would be healed. And God blessed us with that healing, and he was. When we left, he was back to full strength and running around and making a mess and talking 19 to the dozen. And it was such a joy. And I remember the day that he left hospital, I had gone to pick him up with his mum and all of his stuff. And we were so happy. We were just elated, hard to describe, kind of like that man going home to his son. But as we left the hospital, there were people there that weren't leaving. There were worried faces, the way that our faces had been, and there were sick children. And it made me think, I said a prayer for all those people, but it made me think, what happened? What would happen? How would I feel if James hadn't been healed? I remember a friend who used to be a Christian, sadly they're not anymore, and they said, I prayed for my father. He was a good Christian man. I prayed that God would heal him, and he didn't. I just can't believe in a God that would let that happen anymore. And myself, I have personal stories of my own dad who died at a very young age of cancer, and I remember when he died, it was a struggle. Especially as there was 2 other men in church at the same time as him who had the same type of cancer, and they celebrated their healing, and yet my dad died. Now, I don't begrudge their healing at all. That's not the point in bringing it up, but it just raises so many painful questions, and faith can be shaken at times like that. There are lots of examples in the Bible of God healing. Does God promise healing if we follow him? And then other questions arose, did my dad die because we lacked faith? Because it says the faith of the righteous, can avail much. Why wasn't he healed? Did we disobey in some way? Does God maybe have favourites? Maybe we didn't have enough people praying. These are all the questions that go through your mind. And I wonder if some of you have struggled too, or are struggling. And the subject of healing, it's huge. And I don't have time to study it today. Running out of time probably. But it is a huge subject, so I would like to recommend that you go to the GCI website, and they have a series of wonderful articles on divine healing, and they were written by Dr. DeCatch and Bernie Schnippert, and I've put the address up on the screen so you can see it. So if you have some of those questions like I had, go and read those articles, pray, and God will answer your prayers. Sometimes it takes a long time, but they're really good articles. And I found a lot of answers to the questions that I had, things that I was still thinking about, still niggling away in the background. But in the time left, there was one truth that really stuck out and helped me the most, and that's what I'd like to spend a little bit more time today talking about. If you're a sick person, regaining full health can be the most important thing in the world for you. You know, good health is important for yourself and for your loved ones. Nobody can deny that. It's supremely important. And anyone who's ever been seriously ill or watched a loved one suffer in sickness will immediately and compassionately, they'll be moved to recognize the fact it is important. It means a lot. But you know, in these articles, Dr. DeCatch and Bernie Schnippert remind us of this really important thing. He says, or they say, although important, physical health is not the most important thing. The most important thing in anyone's life is spiritual health and salvation. We must never, never lose sight of this critical truth. Sometimes it seems that we can attach more importance to our physical welfare than our spiritual welfare. And that can happen in many aspects of life, not just in health matters. When we go through trials, we think and we get waylaid perhaps by thinking about what we need to happen now in this physical life. But you know, God's focus, as Jesus's focus was throughout all of the examples in the Bible, he was focused on spiritual health. He was focused on the plan of salvation. That was his primary goal, and it was Jesus Christ came to reveal himself, and the signs and miracles pointed to him. So God's focus is our spiritual health. It is our eternal life and our salvation, and it's from this standpoint that he makes all the decisions about us. When we have faith in God, we completely trust that he has our best interests at heart. And he will do what is best for us in the long run. You know, God can and does heal. Sometimes it's immediate and sometimes it takes a while. But sometimes God, for whatever reason, says no to divine healing. And you know, we rejoice when we are healed, when others are healed. And we mourn and weep with those to whom God says no. Not at this time. Sometimes God uses healing to strengthen faith and to point to him and the works of salvation that he's doing. You know, in the Bible we read that we have to call for the elders when we're sick and ask for anointing. We're told we should pray for others who are sick. And God does allow our prayers to influence him. He can be moved by our prayers. He won't be moved beyond his primary goal of salvation for all mankind, but he will change his plans when we ask him. We have to accept the fact that sometimes in this physical life, we won't understand completely why God does what he does, why he allows what he allows. We have to be okay with not knowing. That's where the faith comes in. That's where we trust him. Instead, we cling to what we do know. We put God's will above our own. That's hard to do. See, we always want our will above God's. But he needs us to trust him and to be able to give our lives to him, not take them back, and to be able to say, this is what I would like. I'd like to be healed. I'd like to get out of this trial, but not my will, your will. And maybe one day we'll get to the point where we can be like Job and say, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope that you have a good rest of the week and that you are blessed. And thank you for joining me, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.